All right, hey, we're pleased to be joined by Joe Cook from Inside Texas, part of the On3 network. And Joe, it's been a while since we've seen you. Too long, really. Saw you at SEC Media Days, and brings a smile to my face to see you're a fellow mustache brother.
Yeah, I'm trying. Off season's time for experiments, right? But yeah, I was in your neck of the woods. Went to Atlanta. I'm excited to hopefully you'll make it to Dallas and check out that Omni and everything the Metroplex provides. And really looking forward to it. Should be fun to see Sark talking with coaches like Lane and even Kalen DeBoer, Brian Kelly. I'm excited, and it's just part of the building excitement for Texas' first year in the SEC.
Right, and obviously it's been a long time coming, Joe. I mean, again, we saw you at SEC Media Days, even though Texas was still in the Big 12. So I can only imagine, and we were just talking off air, just the excitement within the fan base. What do you think is something that maybe Texas fans are most excited about coming into the SEC for the first time, playing that full SEC slate?
Instead of teams like Kansas State and BYU coming to town, Florida and Georgia are coming to town. I think it just starts with that. And hey, Kansas State's been a good team in the Big 12 for a while. They won the Big 12, I think, in 2022. So it's not like they're a slouch of a program, but they're not the name brands that Georgia and Florida are. And, going to playing Oklahoma and Dallas with SEC logos on the field, getting that Texas A&M rivalry back. I think it's just a lot of it is the helmets on the field that are going to be showing up. And the programs attached to them, that's going to be part of the excitement for the Longhorns, and not having to, maybe face a team like Iowa State or a team like, even Oklahoma State, who in the week leading up, there was an Iowa State left guard who said he prepares as hard as he prepares for the Texas game with a fervor like how he prepares for the Iowa game. Texas didn't have that level of disdain for Iowa State. West Virginia tried to become a rival for some reason during the first couple of years of their membership of the Big 12. It sounds pompous, but teams liked beating up on Texas, and it was a very achievable task. But now, when you think of the SEC, every team's capable of beating up on the other. You still have rivalries, but Texas is looking forward to big brands like Georgia and Florida, even Kentucky, when you get to the quality football program they become and the basketball program they'll bring with them in that front coming to the Moody Center. They're excited to see the name brands of college athletics headed to Austin.
Yeah, no doubt. And hey, I got to give you credit, Joe, because at Media Days, we asked you, should Texas go into Tuscaloosa and come out a winner? Would they make the college football playoff? And you predicted if they did that they would. And obviously they did. And not only did they beat Alabama, quite frankly, they whooped them in Tuscaloosa. So credit to you for that. But I don't know. You tell me, what is the sense of how the season ended? Was it a missed opportunity? Because I feel like, I thought Texas, I thought they'd beat Washington. And quite frankly, I thought Alabama would beat Michigan, so that goes to show what I know. But had it been a rematch, Texas would have had certainly some confidence that they could win a national championship. Is there any sense that, man, we missed a shot there, or is it more, hey, we reached the college football playoff, we're on the rise, I'm sure the main goal was to win the Big 12. They accomplished that before heading into the SEC. Is there any sense of a missed opportunity? Is it more about this is a program seriously on the rise under Steve Sarkisian?
From, I think, what was it, December 3rd to December 31st, it's all right. They made it. They're in the playoff. They're in the Sugar Bowl. And then once the calendar turns to January 1st, you want to win. You want to be playing next Monday after that. And I think Texas fumbled the ball twice during that playoff game and on good drives where they had chances to score, and they lost by 6 points. Credit, of course, goes to Michael Penix playing one of the games of his life. I've been covering Texas since 2016, and I think that game that Penix put together is only rivaled by a game Joe Burrow put together in Austin in 2019. So sometimes you go against a supernova football player who has the game of his life, and we saw he couldn't replicate the performance next week against Michigan. So Texas, of course, was happy and ecstatic to be in the last iteration that we know of the four-team playoff. But once you make it, you want to win it. They probably, Michigan was going to be a tough out no matter who they played in the next round. I think you're right. They would have felt pretty good about facing Alabama again because as much as Jalen Milroe developed over the course of the season, there were still some aspects of Jalen Milroe that were keeping the Tide offense, a little bit back. So I think they would have been really confident. Alabama would have been confident, of course, as well. It would have made for a fun game in Houston, but they never got there. Now the goal for them, of course, in the expanded 12-team playoff is to be in that playoff pretty much on a yearly basis. I think that's what their expectation is this year. They want to compete for the SEC, obviously, but Georgia and Ole Miss and LSU and Alabama still, and even Oklahoma and Texas A&M are going to want to say something about that. But this is a year for them where they believe they can really compete for the title. If they get over 10.5 wins, like the number seems to be, well, that puts you in great territory to be in Atlanta. But making the playoff this past year, great achievement, but they want that to continue going forward.
And what's your confidence level in Steve Sarkisian to actually get that done and I'm talking win a national championship, and it doesn't necessarily have to be next season or anything like that, but like you said, the over-under total is one of the highest in the country. Just had a friend of the show, Jake Wimberly, on, and his model has got, I don't know if you saw this, but Texas 12-0, the only team, according to his analytics, that is projected to go undefeated in the SEC. So clearly they got the roster, they got the schedule. We know Sarkisian is an elite recruiter. Texas has got all the advantages in the world, arguably the best NIL game out there, which is, people say that like it's a dirty thing. I love it. I mean, it's all within the rules, so more power to him. So he's got everything he needs to win it all, but obviously he's never done that as a head coach. What's your confidence level that Steve Sarkisian can actually get that done in Austin?
Hey, Steve Sarkisian had never won 10 games or a conference championship until last year. So we're having the same conversation a year ago. We're talking about that, and he goes and gets it done. I think there's a lot of confidence that that's possible. It's going to be tougher than ever having to win maybe 3 or 4 games in order to do it. But there's confidence in the fact with the recruiting, the roster that he has. He's got 3 straight top 6 classes, including a number 5 and a number 3 group in the 2022 and 2023 classes. Was just barely beaten by Miami, I think, in on-threes rankings in the 2024 cycle. Portal and NIL, he's made great use of that. Lane Kiffin may have signed the best class as far as quality and even numbers. Texas didn't take a ton of players in the portal, but they addressed major needs, whether it was at wide receiver, defensive tackle, or even on the edge. So you look at the roster, the quarterback situation, the offense, Steve Sarkisian's ability to call an offense, the continuity among the coaching staff. They're going to have the same coordinators again this upcoming season for the 4th year in a row. And there's a lot of faith that he can get it done. As long as Steve Sarkisian's calling plays, quarterbacks and wide receivers are probably going to like playing in that offense, and it's probably going to be a pretty good one. The defense, it has questions this upcoming season, including up the middle, whether that's at tackle, linebacker, or even at safety. But at the same time, there's been enough recruiting and portal wins to where there's some young prospects that have a lot of promise. So I think everybody's kind of looking at Sark and seeing that extension and seeing it as something that's been rightfully deserved, and that he'll, of course, the expectations are a lot higher now that he's entered some extremely elite salary company. But the expectation also is that he'll be able to do it, and he's set himself up extremely well to continue a really successful run.
Well, so was there any panic at all in Austin when Nick Saban retired? Because naturally everybody, they're looking at Sarkisian, Kiffin, Dan Lanning, but I think at the top of most of those people's list is Sarkisian, given his ties to Alabama. And I realize, I don't think he really gave it any consideration whatsoever, but was there any immediate panic as soon as Nick Saban retired that, oh my goodness, with all this momentum could be gone like that if he leaves?
Over the course of December, everybody that we talked to at Inside Texas was pretty confident something was going to get done. They knew it would take maybe till the end of the season, after the season was over, for something to take place. But There was a sense that Texas wanted Sarkisian to stay in Austin, and Sark and his family and everybody who's been close with him likes being in Austin. And then Saban retired, and that probably didn't really scare Texas as much as it gave him a little bit more urgency and maybe resulted in a few more dollars for Sarkisian as a result. So I don't think there was any fear that Sark was going to, leave in the middle of the night like Brian Kelly did for LSU. But at the same time, they knew that he had connections to Alabama and that Nick Saban and the even just the city of Tuscaloosa was a big deal and a big step and a big place in his career. But at the same time, we see what the portal does to rosters, even what it did to Alabama's roster, losing a great immediate impact player like Caleb Downs, and even losing someone who's going to be there for the future in Julian Sayin. Why would he want to leave a stacked roster at Texas and go restart at Alabama when they're in kind of at this juncture without Saban there, comparable situation? So, like I said, there was urgency, and I think Saban retiring maybe increased that urgency. But similar applies with Oregon and Dan Lanning. They didn't want to lose him. He's in a good situation. They have money to be able to give to him, and he earned it. Same goes with Mike Norvell. Florida State, snubbed from the playoff, wins the ACC in a great situation. They're going to reward him. Kalen DeBoer, a little bit different. That roster up in Washington was about to lose a bunch of fifth and sixth year players, including their quarterback and their top three receivers who made that thing go. They were it was about to be a step down for him. So of course, when a program like Alabama comes calling and the resources that Nick Saban has managed to not only cultivate but marshal is available to you after starting your career at an NAIA school in South Dakota, you're probably going to take that call. But when you're at Texas, when you're at Oregon, when you're at a Florida State that seems serious about being the best football program in a conference that wants to leave, you're not going to be able to outshine those guys, but it is going to cause maybe people you're bidding against to act a little bit more urgently. And I think that's what happened with Texas and Sarkisian.
Yeah. In your opinion, has Quinn Ewers, has he even scratched the surface of what he can be there in Austin? And is it fair to even wonder if he's even better this upcoming season? But given the losses, I know they've really hit it in the transfer portal to kind of replace a lot of the departures, but even still, a lot of those guys, it may not be like day one as good. It may take half a season, but is it fair to wonder that even if Quinn Ewers is better, he could have similar style production given that there's a lot of transition around him?
Yeah, there's an expectation that Quinn Ewers takes a step up. And I think it's not only just in on-field play, but in leadership. And you saw him in that Oklahoma State game, granted against a pretty overmatched defense, just slice and dice the Cowboys through the air in Arlington. And there were other moments where he had some great games. At Alabama, he played one of the best games of his career. The thing is that there are times when he can get slightly careless with the football. He's much better at it now than he was as a redshirt freshman, but it still happens. The other question is his durability. Back-to-back seasons, he missed multiple games and the backup quarterback had to play. He still recorded a lot of great stats this season. I think over 3,300 or over 3,000 yards. And, if he had decided to declare for the draft, probably not going any later than day two. And a lot of that's still on potential. But he's got to show durability. And yeah, you can't account for Dallas Turner falling with all his weight on your shoulder. And you can't account for, smacking your shoulder while you're trying to reach for a football. Sometimes that's just a sport. But at the same time, missed games are missed games. And Texas would be better served, and Quinn as well, if he's able to stay in those games, show an element of development over the course of his what'll be his fourth college football season, his third in the offense, and help lead Texas into the SEC, where they're going to need him to lead an offense that scores a lot of points against Oklahoma, Michigan, of course, in week 2, Georgia when they show up in Austin, and even some of the better defenses. Like Mark Stoops isn't going to run a bad defense. The Arkansas has some quality coordinators, even if they may not have the exact talent they need. Texas A&M is going to want to beat Texas, and Mike Elko is going to want to make a statement as a defensive coach against an offensive opponent in his first year in that rivalry returning. So there's a lot of opportunity available for Quinn Ewers to have the type of season where he becomes talked about like someone like JJ McCarthy or maybe not exactly Drake May, but these first round guys who are built off of successful season over successful season and development that help lead their team to team wide success.
Now, Joe, I don't know if you saw this. It was about a week ago, but Bill Connolly from ESPN, he puts out annually his total returning production figures, and Texas was number 2 in the entire SEC. And now I believe the way Bill Connolly's doing it this year is he is factoring in transfers. So got to make that little caveat there. But did that surprise you at all that Texas is second leading returner of production across the entire SEC? Because usually what this statistic means, it doesn't necessarily mean you got the second best team, but if you're in that top half, you can expect improvement, which a team that just won its conference and went to the college football playoff, if we're talking improvement, maybe Texas really is a national championship type contender.
Last year, I think they were second in the Big 12 in returning production, and they were only second to Kansas, who lost nobody, and I think was number 2 in returning production overall. So, and that's when you factor in they had a transfer like Adonai Mitchell, who accounted for a lot of the touchdowns through the air this year. Makes a lot of sense. Quinn Ewers is coming back. There are 3 wide receiver transfers that's replacing starters like Xavier Worthy, Adonai Mitchell, Jordan Whittington. All were productive at their most recent stops. Isaiah Bond, obviously, at Bama, Matthew Golden at Houston, Silas Bolden at Oregon State, all were extremely productive. So you're not losing a ton as far as wide receiver production, like as number for number basis. Then you also throw in Amari Niblack, who a little bit of a different player than Jatavian Sanders, but a receiving threat nonetheless. They lose an 1,000-yard rusher in Jonathan Brooks, but they have a former 5-star there waiting behind him in CJ Baxter and also Jaden Blue, who got a lot of run over the course of last season. And they returned 4 of 5 starters on the offensive line. The only guy they're losing is Christian Jones, the 6-year senior, who's going to be drafted at some point, probably in day 3. But their left tackle, Kelvin Banks, is back. 5th-year senior Jake Majors is at center. Returning starter DJ Campbell at right guard, and then Hayden Connor plays left guard, but he could move around. And in 2022, during that recruiting class, Texas added 7 offensive linemen. So those guys are coming into age. They're either going to be juniors or redshirt sophomores, and they're going to have opportunities to maybe find a spot in that offensive line, maybe unseat some guys in that offensive line. That's a lot of guys coming back on that infrastructure of that offense. And then the areas where you lost people, namely at wide receiver and tight end, you make these great portal additions that, again, number for number, help in that quarter or help in the returning production category. The curious thing, and I think you know this, is that Texas A&M is first in the SEC, I think, in returning production, and we know that is a little bit based off of Connor Wegman coming back, but also they had to hit the portal really hard. So that just shows, not to denigrate Texas A&M portals additions, because they did pick up a lot of pieces that they needed after Jimbo got fired. But it does show that returning production, would you take Texas roster? Would you take A&M's right now? Both are great. Both are probably top 20, maybe top 15 in the country. But returning production for Texas is a little bit different than the returning production for A&M, just as a comparison between 2 schools that have a little bit to do with each other.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned obviously returning production on the field, production in terms of obviously head coach and coordinators, but one loss this offseason, defensive line coach Bo Davis. How big of a blow do you think that is to Texas? Because that guy is just, I mean, he is arguably the best defensive line coach in the country. You know, what he did at Texas was remarkable. He's been all over the SEC, and I'm sure LSU paid a hefty price to bring him to Baton Rouge. How big of a blow to Sark's coaching staff was that?
Definitely a big loss for Texas. Everybody remembers the bus rant in 2021 where he's telling people to get into the portal after they lost, I think it was 33-7 at Iowa State. Really bad game. Made me never want to go back to Ames, but I saw beautiful Iowa this past year during this season. But a lot of Texas cultural turnaround, which has to happen after a 5-7 season, was credited to Bo just telling people to nut up. And the funny thing is, even after that game, I think they lost two more. Like I think they had to go. I think the Kansas loss may have happened after that, and then the loss to West Virginia happened after that. But then you see Texas bring in basically like I think half of a roster full of new guys. And not only is that the recruiting class, that's the portal, but that illustrates that there was half the roster that didn't really want to be there in one part of it. So Bo Davis, obviously Texas goes 8-5 in 2022, making a 3-game improvement. And then you see what happened this past year. Bo Davis gets a lot of credit for that just culturally. On field, obviously, in 2022, Keandre Coburn and Moro Ojimo get drafted, two defensive tackles playing alongside each other. And then this year, Tavondre Sweat and Byron Murphy, two guys who may both be first round picks. Both were All Americans. Sweat was the Outland Trophy winner. They owe a lot of their development, of course, to Bo Davis. He's not an easy coach to replace, and he was tough to replace the other time he was at Texas and decided to leave. I think it was for Alabama then. So he's a valuable piece. There's some argument that maybe Texas could have done more on the recruiting trail under Bo Davis. And some of that was even manifested when kind of backwards thinking here, but when Bo Davis left, they lost a defensive tackle signee. That meant that over the last two classes, Texas signed three defensive tackles, and that's not going to work in the league that they're going into. It's why they had to make a portal addition at defensive tackle. So he recruited really well, but I think there's an idea that there's a higher ceiling for defensive line recruiting. That's going to be tough for Kenny Baker, the new defensive line coach who came over from the Miami Dolphins. Kind of a guy who's been all around that there's a rectangle, I think, of Atlanta, Chattanooga, maybe Huntsville, and then Birmingham, something like that. I need to get a little bit more familiar with that geography now that we're in the SEC. But basically, a guy who's lived in that area, coached in that area for his whole life. They hope that maybe he can mine some of his connections and resources, both in Georgia, but maybe as well in Mississippi and Alabama, to where there are a lot of large defensive tackles worth recruiting to Texas and help the Longhorns in that respect. But he's also got big shoes to fill in on-field coaching. It's going to be tough. And I guess you could say the returns are not totally known yet. I think this recruiting class and this upcoming season are going to say a lot. But at this point, I would call Bo Davis a significant loss for Texas, not only culturally, but results-wise, both on the field and in recruiting.
Now, I realize transfer portal, there's another window upcoming, but I think that, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think the number is 8 incoming transfers they've added, and it's a consensus top 10 class, while other people bring in 20 or 30 transfers. So Texas is clearly, and they're in a position to do this, but they're bringing in quality, not quantity. Is there one or two transfers that stand out that you anticipate will have a bigger impact than maybe some of the others?
Yeah, I mean, I obviously talked about the receivers, Golden and Bond. Those are going to be 1A, 1B guys at receiver. Nyblack, of course, at tight end. If he's not a starter, he's going to be featured extremely often. But on the defensive side, I think one of the biggest additions they made was Andrew Makuba. He's a all ACC player from Clemson who went to high school in the Austin area, still decided to go to Clemson, even with Texas under the old Tom Herman staff pursuing him. Entered the portal after the season, made a pretty quick decision to get to Texas, and is a very versatile piece. He's probably going to end up playing safety. He could end up playing nickel, which right now is occupied by, fifth-year senior Jahdae Barron. But he could do safety. He could do either safety spot, and he could play nickel as well. And that's a position that Texas had some struggles at last year. They ended up playing a walk-on turned scholarship player named Michael Taft there. And while he's great, there's a reason he started his career as a walk-on. He knows where to be, but compared to some of the other guys on the roster, not as fast as getting there. It's just plain and simple, has nothing to do with anything as far as except for athletic ability. Andrew Makuba knows how to get there and can get there really quickly. They also have a sophomore in Derek Williams, a former five-star from Louisiana that they took from LSU along with Arch Manning in that 2023 class, who saw a lot of run during the latter portion of the season and probably is going to be a starter. So that addition in the secondary of Andrew Makuba, I think, is one that may have flown a little bit under the radar because it was one of the earlier ones. It was announced during the first signing day. So any transfers that take place then are often overshadowed by, look at this recruiting class, and oh, we got this five-star and this great player. But that's one that's probably going to be instant impact on the defensive side of the ball for Texas and improve an area that needed big time improvement, as we of course saw during the Sugar Bowl when they just couldn't stop Michael Penix through the air.
Mm-hmm. Now I realize there's no wrong answer here, Joe, but Oklahoma, let's take that off the table. I realize just one of the best rivalries in all of sports. And I do want to ask you about A&M in just a second. So let's take that one off the page as well. But if we're looking past Oklahoma, we're looking past A&M, is there another one game that stands out on the SEC schedule that these Texas fans are more excited about than any other?
If you're looking at just the 2024 schedule, it's of course Georgia. The number one team in the country coming to town. It's unfortunate for a lot of people who may want to get to that game that the Formula One race is heading to Austin that same weekend. And I've made this joke a couple times. If you haven't gotten your hotel yet, you're probably not going to get one. And I even joked with the On3 site at Georgia, like, hey guys, like, you better book this now. It's like, don't worry, we got an RV coming. I'm like, okay, that's how y'all operate. But it's definitely that Georgia game when you have a program running at peak efficiency like Kirby Smart and Georgia have, heading to Austin. That's the thing. The reason Texas schedules all these premier out-of-conference games is going back to the point I made earlier. There weren't name brands coming to Austin as far as conference play goes. Now in conference play, the Georgia Bulldogs are heading to Austin, Texas to play the Texas Longhorns. Like, that's what Texas fans have wanted. It features two great head coaches battling each other on, their respective sides of the ball. Georgia's stacked roster, Texas roster, which is extremely strong right now. Great quarterbacks in Carson Beck and Quinn Ewers. And just it's going to be a battle. The Longhorns have done pretty well, maybe not wins and losses wise, playing these premier home games against big non-conference opponent, but they always show up, whether it be LSU in 19, 2021. No, they went to Arkansas. So LSU in 19, Bama in 22 against Bryce Young. And then, this upcoming season when they have Georgia coming to town, that's the big one. But going forward in the SEC, if you ask a lot of older Longhorn fans, I don't know if they're excited, but they're looking forward to the opportunity to beat Arkansas. If you go back into the 60s, 70s, and even into the 80s, Arkansas and Texas were huge rivals, and not just because they border each other, but because they were quality programs. I mean, game of the century in 1969 with President Johnson there, and there's a great, President Nixon there. Yeah, great 30 for 30 on that one, and about how President Nixon decided to call that game's winner the national champion instead of a quality Penn State team during that season. Still rubbed some people the wrong way up in Happy Valley. But still, a lot of great rivalry games. Darrell Royal, Frank Broyles, Mac Brown heading into and even he was upset a couple times by Arkansas. And there is a level of hatred that Arkansas fans have for Texas that most people kind of my age, maybe even your age, don't understand, because once Arkansas left the Southwest Conference for the SEC, they only played a handful of times. It's why Brett Bielema in 2014 called beating the dog out of Texas in that bowl game borderline erotic.
To beat Texas in a way that was really, pretty significant, to kneel on the 2-yard line, 3 times in a row at the end of the game for me, that's a very fulfilling moment. Borderline erotic. I mean, it's really
So I know Arkansas fans are looking forward to that one. They want to make 2021 where they basically beat Texas 41-20 and dominated every aspect, a recurring theme. If you ask Texas fans, they would probably rank Arkansas as far as who's going to be on the future schedule third in that order of rivals behind Oklahoma and Texas A&M. But they still like beating Arkansas and being able to hold that over a lot of people who, DFW sends a lot of people to Arkansas now, not just athletics wise, but school wise. The Jerry Jones factor, of course, is also there. So I think it's Arkansas. And then after that, I don't think you can put your finger on a specific team. Just the name brands that are coming in, not just for football, but you get Kentucky's and Tennessee and Rick Barnes for basketball. And then you get, the baseball quality, which I think Texas fans who love their baseball heading to the dish, they're going to be excited to see, this constant stream of quality program after quality program who basically always live in the top 25 heading into Austin in the spring weekends.
Yeah. Well, I can't let you out of here without asking you a final thing about A&M. And we're finally getting that game back. And I have no allegiances to Texas or Texas A&M. I'm not from the state or anything, but I have missed this game so dearly. So I can't even imagine what it's like being in that state and just, 10 plus years of bickering online. And it's finally going to come down to the field, College Station, to end the regular season. But who do you think will have more pressure, Joey, in that game? Is it Texas, who's got, all these wild aspirations and, by all accounts, they should be a playoff team, whereas A&M, I know they're pretty fired up about the Mike Elko era, but if they were to win 10 games this year, I mean, they'd be over the moon, I feel like, whereas if Texas won 10, I think it almost would be a disappointment. So who do you think will have more pressure when they meet on the field? Will it be Texas or will it be A&M to defend the home field?
Looking at it in the last week of February, this far ahead of the season, I think it's safe to say Texas at this point because we know what Texas expectations are, where they think they're going to be, what Sarkisian has going, roster wise, quarterback wise, all that. But A&M's got a pretty easy schedule. Like they don't draw any. Texas is their biggest challenge, and they get them at home in a rivalry game that everybody within 2 hours who wears maroon is going to try to go to. So I think that right now it's Texas, but I think like you mentioned and like I kind of brought up with the schedule, that could be a game where there's a spot in the playoff on the line. And neither head coach wants to hear it from their constituency that, why didn't you beat their rival, especially Sark, who's now 1-2 against Oklahoma. But if a spot in the playoffs on the line, there's going to be a considerable amount of pressure on Mike Elko, especially when you think about the mental dynamic of that SEC move. Even Ross Bjork himself, in a little bit of a floundering moment, said, we joined the SEC expecting to be the only SEC brand in Texas. If Mike Elko lets Texas not only beat him, but walk into new Kyle Field with probably 110,000 people at night on Thanksgiving weekend, there's not going to be a lot of Aggies who are very pleased with that outcome. So there's pressure on both. There's pressure on every head coach in every game. But rivalry-wise, there's definitely going to be pressure on both. Could be increased because of the spot in the playoff, and maybe for one of these teams, a spot in Atlanta on the line. But looking at it from right here in February, I think it's safe to say that Sarkisian has the higher pressure just because of the current level of expectations in Austin.
Oh, yeah, and one other thing, I apologize, but I did see the Texas AD said, that he would prefer that game, I guess, move to Thursday. Is that something? Is that a consensus among the fans, or what's your thoughts on that?
It varies person to person. Towards the end, it was on Thanksgiving night. I like it when it's on the day after. I like the Black Friday matchup because it allows everybody to go do Thanksgiving and then get to whatever city they need to the next day. I know I've researched this, but I don't know off the top of my head how often it's been on that Saturday. And I know that's rivalry Saturday, but they've liked having it during the day, at least if it's not going to be on Thanksgiving night. Are you going to go against the game up at Michigan and Ohio State? Are you going to try to go up against the Iron Bowl? Having it on Thanksgiving, this year, it's going to draw no matter what, as far as college football fans go, even with the Egg Bowl going on. And I know that's a big game, but to be fair, I think that the return of a Texas versus Texas A&M rivalry will get a little bit more attention in the national college football consciousness. But like, I don't know what the future plan is, because I know with Texas A&M, they like playing LSU on Thanksgiving, and LSU wants nothing to do with that and likes playing it on Saturday night. So, and I think there's even an aspect of the schedule right now to where they can flex that game. I don't think I think it's written in marker, but it can whiteout can be put over it, and they can change it this year. I don't know that for sure, but I don't remember it being something completely set in stone. So I'm okay with the idea of Thanksgiving, especially this year, I guess. I think in future years, you're going to see college football try to move away from that as best they can, just because they know you're competing with the Cowboys. And that's another Texas consideration. There are some people who are going to watch the Cowboys no matter what over the Longhorns and the Aggies. You're still competing with whoever the Lions play. And now you're competing with a Thursday night game that I bet the Egg Bowl's ratings have been a little bit suppressed nationwide just because there's another NFL game for them to compete with. So I'm fine with it this year being on that traditional day of Thanksgiving, but I think going forward, the best thing possible is just try to find a standalone spot in that weekend, maybe on that Friday, that's not competing with some of the other big SEC rivalry games like Alabama and Auburn, or even looking at like Florida State, anything like that. Try to move away, and I think that's a good move by the SEC. So then you can dominate that whole weekend. You've got the Egg Bowl with Lane Kiffin in it. You've got maybe Texas and Texas A&M on Friday, and then you can go with the full gamut of rivalry games on Saturday in the coming season. So that's my take on it. But overall, I'm just excited to see that it's back. And like you mentioned from the top, online bickering is over. The results on the field are going to be what tell the tale of this rivalry.
I got goosebumps just thinking about that game. So, Joe, thank you so much for the time. Joe Cook, Inside Texas. Before you go, can you tell my audience how can they follow you and how can they find your work?
Yeah, head to InsideTexas.com. We're the Longhorns site on the On3 network, so you get all the coverage of Texas Longhorn sports as well as the great things On3 provides. I'm at Twitter at JosephCook89, and we're on at Inside Texas, no spaces or anything, on basically every other platform you got. So come and check us out. Great spot for Longhorn discussion, and of course, On3 is a great home for any SEC fan as well.